All right. Can everyone hear me okay? Good? All right, awesome. So I'm going to get started here in just a couple seconds. If waiting for a couple more people to sit down, and then we'll get going here. All right. So to get started today, what I have prepared is, originally I had a lot of different PowerPoint slides going, but it is 10 a.m., so I figured I'd do a little bit of a console demo as well for Carbon Black. That way no one falls asleep on me. For an introduction perspective, I am Rich Buckley. I've been with Carbon Black and Bit9 for about 2 years now, a little over 2 years actually. And today I'm going to be talking about advanced threat hunting. So typically though, in the past, when it comes to threat hunting, people focus mainly on detection, right? Carbon Black is a bit different, and really it's because the whole mind state should be changed to collection rather than just simply detection. By prioritizing collection over detection, you do a lot more stuff faster, right? You can hunt more effectively, you can find root cause very quickly, which is the most important part in my opinion. You can reconstruct the timelines of what happened, so you don't just see one portion of the piece, or the kill chain, as everyone in marketing now calls it, but rather go all the way back to how did it get delivered into my environment, how did it happen. Obviously accelerate that, and then obviously in the next step is IR should always drive your security model, so let's make sure that doesn't happen again. Typically, and I like this slide because it shows really what people saw from an investigation perspective by focusing on the traditional focus, which is just detection. Great, I have an alert, something bad happened, hopefully my security stack stopped it, but I don't really see what I should be seeing, which is below the water in this case. If you don't continually collect data and focus on collection rather than detection, it's going to take a lot longer to find abnormal behavior, to find lateral movement, new user accounts being created as a stronghold. It's going to be a lot harder to find exfiltration as well. Mainly because, and everyone in here should know this, you can't know what's bad ahead of time. And so if you're only focusing on starting to collect that information when something bad happens, well then you're going to miss a majority of the attacks, especially advanced attacks. So what are some things that you should be looking for that you can really only do if you collect everything proactively? Things like abnormal user accounts being used, things like LSAS, SVC hosts running under a strange parent or running under a strange user context like system. Is Internet Explorer, Acrobat, Word, Notepad, all of those wonderfully securely coded programs being used to spawn child processes? Is Office ever making an outbound connection? Is Java spawning command shells, et cetera, and the list goes on. I'm going to walk through the console too to show you how, in my case, Carbon Black really does help me do this. Then some more things, when it comes to living off the land, you don't have to really introduce new binaries or executables to do a lot of damage once you're in. So, are you recording every command line entered? Are you recording and getting alerted to whenever net.exe is being ran? Are you seeing when PowerShell is being used? PowerShell obviously is extremely powerful. Are you recording that, or are you just waiting for someone to tell you that something bad happened after PowerShell ran? And the list goes on and on, as you can imagine. So let's go over some hunting tips. So first, you want to collect the right data, right? Your perimeter defense stuff, your NetFlow, your firewalls can give you some data, but that's not where the activity is happening. It's not where the attack's happening. The attack's happening on the endpoint. Traditionally, what I saw when I went into a lot of enterprises was, their firewall log or the network guy would be alerted to a security event, and then all they had to go off of was some type of a Windows event log, which missed a lot of stuff for them. Or even worse, if they had to do it after the fact, they would have to image a whole computer, which can take 10, 15 hours per machine. Then you got to analyze the relationship. So you got to make sure you know the chain of events and what happens. This is key to detect the abnormal behavior, right? If they're using stuff living off the land, that could be legitimate use cases, but if you don't have the relationships, you might miss the malicious use cases of them. Incorporating reputation and classification information. So there's a lot of good intel out there, a lot of good threat feeds out there, and IOCs out there. So why not just bring those in automatically and proactively? And finally, automate as much as possible. So you don't want to do this stuff manually all the time. So you want to make sure that your incident response plan is a bit automated. That way you're not just wasting a lot of time running around. And as I promised, that's all I'm going to do for the PowerPoint, and I'm going to hop into the actual console demonstration. Any questions so far? All right. So I'm going to run a basic attack here, nothing crazy, it's just something I made in Interpreter. But it's something that happens almost every day and something I see a lot of. And in this case, it's just your standard spear phishing attack email. In this case, it tells my end user that there's a PDF attached to this email. You might need a plugin to view it. Just go ahead and install it. Okay, great. So I'm just going to mash download. And I'm going to save this file. And I'm going to mash open. Now, as an attacker, I'm in. And unless I had a security defense tool or your traditional AV that would have stopped this attack, I would have no idea as an IT guy that I just got breached. Now, this could be doing a lot of things in the background, and it is, and I'm going to be able to walk through that. But if you're relying on definitions or you're relying on your network wall to find a bad network connection out or some type of callback, you might never know that this happened for days, weeks, months. I think the average is about 260 days for a breach to be detected or found, and so that just simply doesn't work out. Nowadays, it just takes a couple minutes for me to get in and get out with info. Which brings me to Carbon Black. So going back to the idea of collecting information ahead of time, I just want to spend a couple of minutes about how Carbon Black actually works. So Carbon Black was created by a bunch of red team guys who wanted to get into the private space to obviously make a little bit more money because they were working for a couple of three-letter agencies. And what they realized and what they wanted to do was first figure out how they would stop them. And they sat in a big room and they tried to figure out the best way to always stop their attacks every time. But as we all know, just like with every single pen test out there, unless you reduce the scope or the time allowed for a pen test, they're always going to get in. And they were always going to get in no matter what. So what they realized was that they wanted to turn around the mindset. Okay, instead of stopping us every time, how do you make sure that you catch us every time when it comes to a detection capability? And what they narrowed down to was they wanted to, ahead of time, record every single process instance on every single machine. Meaning when a new PID's assigned to any single binary that runs, they wanted to record all the info that they would typically need to do a manual forensics investigation to grab. So what they narrowed this down is to, whenever a process runs, they want to record every registry modification, every file modification, every module load, every network connection, every cross-process access, every child process spawned. Anytime emit mitigations fired off, they want to record that as well. Any command line entered, what machine it was on, obviously the timestamps. The list goes on and on here. But they wanted to record this absolutely every time. They didn't want to wait for a mousetrap to be set for this to happen. Going back to the idea that data collection is key, and you can't know it's bad ahead of time, you want to make sure that you record this everywhere across the board. What this allows you to do is basically when it's that time to, you have some type of symptom of a compromise, very easy to plug in here. It's basically just like Googling your environment. And you can go off the smallest thread of an incident. You can go off of your standard process name or maybe a host name. You can do it by an IP address, a destination port that you found on your network logs that you didn't like. In the cases of ransomware, just plug in the path of the modified file that was encrypted, and let's figure out exactly what led up to that point of that file being encrypted. You could plug in threat feeds or threat intel, so different IOCs here, and I'll go over these in a moment, like virus total scores, abuse.ch for known Zeus and other types of banking Trojan campaigns, the malware domain list. We recently just turned on our one with the Facebook threat exchange. The point being is that you just need the smallest thread to pull, and you can create the entire picture of what happened in that attack. Any questions so far? Great. What you can also do, though, is take those, patterns or those queries and convert them into jobs or watch lists. So instead of manually typing in whenever net user is entered on any machine, just get an email or a syslog alert or the native alerting capability to have all that information just sent to you proactively as soon as it happens, hands off. So let's look at my watch list here. So I have a couple that I threw up, and there's tons and tons out there. But for example, if you want to keep track of every time a process makes a connection to China or Russia, we can do that for you. Anytime Notepad spawns a child process, we can do that. Anytime a process with an unusual extension runs, we can do that. So while you're getting hit with these different attacks, you want to learn from it. You want to make sure that your detection is more fine-tuned for you, but we can keep track of all this stuff here. So in the case of that PDF attack, I made a very simple one that just says, okay, let me know whenever something that's a non-standard file extension, like a PDF, like a JPEG, gets a PID assigned to it and actually is a running process. So right at the top here, 4 minutes ago, you'll notice that I got a hit for an eventguide.pdf, which is the email attachment that I downloaded. So at a high level, I get all the information that I would need to see that this is probably something I want to take a look at. Where it was, the path, on what computer, no reg mods, no file mods, 48 module loads, a network connection, and 2 child processes spawned. Doesn't take an InfoSec expert to realize that PDFs most likely shouldn't do that. So what can I do from here? Well, I can click on this button, and this will bring me to the process analysis page. Going back to prioritizing collection over detection, I don't have to reach out to this computer and get all this information behind, after the fact. All this stuff's already in the console. So even if this computer is completely hosed and down or bricked, this information is just resting on the back-end server. When I'm on this page, up top you'll see the file name, the computer, the user is running under the context of, how long it ran for, and when it last ran. Any command line scene is captured here, and everything blue is clickable and searchable. So I can even search on the command if this was one. On the right-hand side, I have kind of the Cliff Notes view, in my opinion, of what that process was when it ran, all the types of different metadata you can grab, if it was signed, etc. Below that is all that nitty-gritty detail that I mentioned that we record. So up top is more of just a general overview from a relationship perspective. But down low, if it is interesting to me, I could see what child processes it spawned. I could see what type of handles it opened, etc., etc. Any questions on this? Oh, all right. So let's take a look at this attack from a carbon black perspective. I'm going to focus here on the eventguide.pdf process. And to the right-hand side is what I consider the threat validation, or did anything actually happen, in a bit of the forensics perspective. So if I look to the right, spawn 2 child processes, I grab QUser, and then I migrate it to Notepad. In this case, when I migrated to Notepad, I was running under the admin context. I was able to steal that. After I ran Notepad, had some more fun. In this case, I copied something to a directory. There was a bat file that I ran. That bat file, when I ran it, spawned some more PowerShell and a couple Java attack. PowerShell here ran an encoded command. Go down some more. Copied a bat file that modified the registry here. And I could even get down to what registry keys were changed. Once again, this is searchable, so I could open this up, search it, and see any time in my environment that this was entered on any other computer. And I don't have to wait for a pull to go out and hit all my boxes. It's already in the system. Any questions on this? All right. So this is great when it comes to figuring out, was this a legitimate alert? Should I take action on it? And when it comes to taking action, another thing I commonly found was that people always said instant response was hard. Not because they didn't know how to do it, but rather when it comes to needing a computer offline right away, or they wanted a computer to analyze it, they would have to open up a ticket with some desktop ops team. And especially if you have a global company, that can be literally just them UPSing that box overnight to you. That takes too long, that takes too slow, and if you had the wrong computer, you just wasted a bunch of time and a bunch of company money. So what we did was we put in a couple new features that you can do right from the screen without leaving your desk at all. You can isolate that host, which means that the only network connection allowed from that machine is to your Carbon Black server, and that's it. We don't touch any firewall rules or anything like that. The sensor just effectively becomes a network shim. Then I can go live And what going live does is I like to consider it giving me like a good guy C2 server. I can basically do everything that I would want to do that typically required physical access to that machine or me remoting into it. I can execute files on that machine. I can push a file or like a tool onto that machine that I like to use. I can push that tool out there. I can run it. I can get that information. Haven't left this window yet. This is also automated. So if I wanted to automatically kill certain processes on these blocks when a certain watch list was hit, I can automate that here too. For example, if you do the same couple of things to a machine when you want to triage it every time, well, you can just set it so when a certain trap is hit in Carbon Black, have all that stuff done before you even get to that box. Any questions here? Yep, so it's actually up on GitHub right now. We have an entire open API. Yep, correct. So right now, when you reboot, they will have network connection back. So it's not persistent. I couldn't hear the question, but. Yep, absolutely. So that is part of your best practice, right? Whatever your guidelines are. So if you want to reach out to them and let them know, maybe not to reboot that computer, then you can. You could also get an alert back in the console when they come back online as well. If there's another question. Nope. All right. So since Carbon Black is a purpose-built IR tool, right, this is not really what its wheelhouse was, but it's a nice side effect of having all those relationships ahead of time. Carbon Black is great. I figured out, what led up to this point, so I don't get beat the same way again. I like to compare it to football. Even the best, NFL team in the world, when they get beat by a good defense, they watch tape so they don't get beat the same way and plug up that hole. And with this, since I have all this data ahead of time, it's pretty simple, right? I could just rewind the tape. So what's caused this PDF to run? Well, it came from a command. That command was spawned by Acrobat Reader. And if I go to the right here, just touch on alliance feeds for a moment, you'll notice there's 164 hits and 56 different reports. I got 2 from Virus Total, admittedly false positives. They just have a score of 1 out of the 60 AV engines in there. But if I scroll down, there's 54 relevant CVEs that could have been used during this attack, or just used when this Adobe executable ran. I can see all this stuff, and I can also detect on it. So if I want to create a watch list alert for whenever a new CVE relevant program runs, I could do that, and I can audit every one of them and see what actually happened after it ran. This threat intel, though, just like the CB Live, is another part of the API. So if you have anything that, any really source of IOCs, and we can do Styx Taxi, Yara's coming, but anything that gives you IPv4, MD5s, or DNS, we can work with. We also integrate with a lot of existing firewalls like Palo Alto Networks, FireEye, Checkpoint, Cyfort, etc. Some of the ones we ship with, though, obviously VT. Bit9 has its own, where we have a threat intelligence cloud or a TIC team that basically push down relevant watch lists or relevant information that we found in our travels. And then also, if you wanted to share with us the information, it's just metadata, it's all anonymized. We're also using that to analyze it to shoot down more high confidence alerts. Alien Vault and the Facebook Threat Exchange are the most recent ones that we've added on to. Plug and play. And scrolling down past the Bit9 ones, the MDL, if you guys are Threat Connect customers, we can use that too. NVD, if you want to keep track of Tor activity, we can do that. Checkpoint, Fidelis, PAN, FireEye. Any questions here? All right. So let's keep going backwards. So now I know if I patch this, they have to go back to the drawing board. I won't be hit the same way again. But I can see, yep, question? Yep, great question. So the question was, what is the overhead of the product? And completely common question to say the least. So on the host itself, no CPU and around 8 megs of RAM. I like to compare it to VM tools when it comes to actually on the host itself, what it's running. It should never get past 1%, and it should never get past around 10 megs of RAM. And that's 24/7. Since we don't do yep, go ahead. Yeah, so the heavy lifting does have to be done somewhere. So the back of the house server is where the beefiness comes. From a bandwidth perspective, we see about 10 megabytes a day of data generated per endpoint over 24 hours. You can throttle that if you wanted to. So the bandwidth concern, as you said, isn't that big, but the back of the house server does require a good amount of processing and RAM and fast disks to do. We have people do host it in AWS. Obviously, it's a bit more expensive. Each server itself can handle 5,000 machines at once. Our biggest deployment right now is 120,000 machines, and so they just cluster those servers. But yeah, we can talk offline as well to look at what it would look like for your environment. Any other questions? All right. So going back to this, just to close the loop, because I know we have only a couple of minutes left here. If I want to figure out the people side of this, how did this Adobe Reader exploit spawn? Well, I could see that it came from Internet Explorer. And then if I scroll down and click on the facet for network connections, I can see the 2 connections that were made. I tested the loop back, and then I also communicated out to my Kali server here. Once again, since this is searchable, I can just open this up in a new tab and see everyone else who's ever communicated to that IP address. And that search takes a couple seconds, and then I can see that a PDF also made that call back to the same site that IE delivered it on. Going back more, I can see that IE was spawned by IE, which came from Thunderbird, which came from Explorer.exe. And go. So now, just within a couple of mouse clicks, I was able to figure out not only what happened when that PDF ran and we got alerted to that PDF, but also the next step of patching Adobe Reader. And the beauty of a live demo is that my VM's lagging. But also that someone clicked on this link originally from an email address, from an email client interactively. So that's really the standard dog and pony for a carbon black attack. Obviously, there's plenty of different ways to use this tool. But I hope this answers some questions about how carbon black can be used based on all that collection ahead of time to speed up your incident response process. Any other questions today? Yep. Yep, so this one's, let's see here. Search it. So in this case, it just says, show me any process that wasn't a .exe, that wasn't a .scr, that wasn't a .com. It's pretty simple. Yep, let me just get out of this. Yep. Yep. Yes. Yeah, so that would only be, what you would do is, trying to think. The better search for this that I'm thinking of would be Go to my threat intel page. The icon matching. So for example, it would give you an alert based off of something with a PDF icon that was actually an executable. So that would probably be what they were talking about the UX last week. Let me see here. Yep, so you can search for the process name writing a file out, but unless that file actually ran, so in this case, that PDF wasn't the binary that ran. No. The PDF was just downloaded and then exploited, and then the command wrote out the binary that ran under the same name. Yep, so it showed up as, hold on a second. So this was typically, hold on a second. So I view the binary that was written under eventguide.pdf and then click on Find Writers. It's showing me that in this case, this is a different one. This is when I use PowerShell to write it, but yes, exactly. Any other questions out there? Yep, great point. And that's something that I actually failed to mention. So while you're going through the investigations, since we do record everything good and bad, right, some of this stuff is just general run-of-the-mill activity. But let's say, for example, you wanted to record or make sure that you remembered to write down that there was a cross-process access during this time. You click this button, it will tag it. And I have a pre-built one here. But if I go into my investigations panel, I can have all those little different threads pulled and organized into this area with the timeline and then also all the raw activity. When it comes to the best practices on what to record at that time, it's hard to say, right, because every attack is going to be different. We do have pretty good user training right now, and then also we have a user exchange forum where people do share best practices. And then also in April, there's going to be a SANS class, and their default class is actually using Carbon Black for it. So I don't have a strict answer for you for what is good, what is bad to tag. We can give you some guidance. We'll tell you if it's a known good activity. But when it comes to known bad, that goes back to the idea that it's hard to know what's bad ahead of time. So it's hard to say, you should tag this, you shouldn't tag that. And so we have about 2 minutes left here. If there's no more questions, then I'm happy to speak with anyone outside. Me and my fellow colleague are outside for the rest of the day. And if that's it, then I appreciate your time today. Thank you.